And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather again, heavy rains moving into the southeast coast as a series of waves rotate up along this frontal boundary, slowing it down. So it'll be laying down a good amount of rain with flood watches out for the northern 2/3 of the southeast coast through tomorrow night. Rain continues North Gulf Coast, upper level trough moving eastward here, kind of combines with the moisture of this front, keeping it wet in over south central Alaska, and to a lesser extent over the eastern interior. Chance of rain or snow for the western central Arctic coast north slope. Showers starting to scatter out here over the western interior ahead of this ridge that's pressing in toward the coastline, which is ahead of this next front pushing eastward. That's shoving that ridge eastward. That'll be spreading more rain and wind into the central Aleutians. For tomorrow, that front swings eastward. The main low hanging back there just off the Russian coast. And that'll be slowing it down a little bit and eventually weakening it. But rain will move into the eastern Aleutians, western Alaska Peninsula tomorrow. And then this high right up to the coastline, partly sunny skies, light winds, dry conditions, western interior into the Yukon Flats. Some rain and snow continues, chances of there for the North Slope and Arctic coast. Showers slowly diminishing tomorrow across southern Alaska, but lingering along the Alaska Range, maybe the eastern interior, upper Tanana Valley areas, 40-mile country. Rain, periods of, another low tracks northward here, holding this front back to the west a little bit. Showers Kodiak Island, and then the next day, another front kind of develops and swings up, keeping it wet over the Panhandle, but precipitation won't be as heavy. It should be of a lighter nature there. Partly sunny skies. South central Alaska into the Copper River Basin, still some showers up over the Tanana Valley to the Yukon Flats, but dry to the northwest, dry with clearing back to the west, even the Seward Peninsula. Chances of light snow, just a threat, maybe flurries for the central Arctic coast. And this front just falls to pieces here and barely brings any precipitation into Nunivak Island, and some light shower activity for the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. And for the coastal water forecast, south winds 25 knots here for the south coast of the Panhandle tomorrow. Central coast, east-southeast at 15, and the north coast, east at 10 knots. Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, southeast at 15. Stevens Passage, southeast or south at 20 with gale force gusts. And Clarence Strait, south winds 25 knots. And for the day on Friday, Lynn Canal, southeast winds 10 knots, seas 2 feet. Southeast at 15 for Stevens Passage with 3-foot seas. And for Clarence Strait, light northwesterlies at 10 knots, and the south coast, southwest at 15. South to southeast, 15 knots for the central coast, north coast, east winds 15 knots, seas 5 to 6 feet. Cook Inlet, north winds 10 to 15 knots with 2 to 3 foot seas. Northwest 25 for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands. Light variable winds for the North Gulf Coast at 10 knots with seas, though, 6 to 7 feet. Prince William Sound, southeast wind at 10 knots with slight seas. And for Friday, variable winds at 10 knots for Prince William Sound, variable winds at 10 knots, seas down to 4 feet now for the North Gulf Coast. Cook Inlet, variable to north winds at 10 knots, and northwest 15 to 20 knot winds for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, seas at about 4 feet. Kodiak Island for Thursday, northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. And northwest 25 also for Bristol Bay. The Alaska Peninsula, northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Outlook for Friday, variable winds 10 to 15 knots for Kodiak Island area, and light and variable for Bristol Bay. Alaska Peninsula, west winds 20 to 25 knots. Eastern Aleutians, west to south winds 25 to 30 knots. Gale warnings for Adak and Atka ahead of that incoming front. So 35 knot southerlies there tomorrow, 7 to 10 foot seas, and pretty brisk westerlies behind that front in the 30 to 35 knot range. And for the Friday outlook, western Aleutians, southwesterlies, 25 knots, seas 10 to 12 feet, Adak and Atka, southwest at 15, and the eastern Aleutians, west winds 20 to 25 knots with 7 to 8 foot seas. For the southwest coast, northwest winds tomorrow 15 to 20 knots, north 15 for Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island, 3 to 4 foot seas. Southeast at 10 for St. Matthew Island, southeast at 20 for St. Matthew Island with 10 foot seas. Pribilof, small craft advisories, south winds at 25 knots. And then for Friday, out here over the Bering Sea, southwesterlies at about 20 knots from St. Matthew Island to St. George. and southeast 15 along the southwest coast, southeast 15 for St. Lawrence Island as well. And for the eastern Arctic coast tomorrow, west winds 20 knots, northwest 15 to 20 for the central and west side, and the Chukchi Sea, light northerlies 10 to 15 knots with 3 to 4 foot seas. And for Friday, central eastern Arctic coast, west winds 20 knots, 4 to 6 foot seas there, west at 15 for the west side, and the Chukchi Sea, light variable winds at 5 to 10 knots with 1 to 3 foot seas.